In January 2013, the Exo Terra team traveled to New Caledonia in the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean to collect data on the crested or eyelash gecko, Correlophus ciliatus, and to gain better insight into the habitat and conditions in which these animals live in the wild. After 4 flights and more than 45 hours travel, the team landed on the Isle of Pines. The island was chosen as the starting base because it was here that the gecko was rediscovered in 1994, and the chances to find these creatures were higher. Isle of Pines is situated southeast of Grande Terre, the main island, at about 22 degrees below the equator. This island is around 20 kilometers long and 15 kilometers wide. It was given its name by Captain James Cook in 1774 because of the tall Araucaria conifer trees. Because of its beautiful beaches and heavily irregular coastline with splendid lagoons, many travelers call the Isle of Pines one of the most lovely islands of the South Pacific. Due to its distant location, 36 hours by plane from Europe and more than 9 hours flight from Japan, so far it has been spared the advance of mass tourism. The Isle of Pines is divided into 2 biogeographical areas. Above more or less 40 meters, the surface consists of rocks alternated by strips of fertile soil. The few trees that grow here are mainly low pines. Below 40 meters, the vegetation consists of smaller deciduous trees with a maximum height of 6 to 7 meters and mostly of small shrubs. The subsurface is limestone, in which there are many small gorges and even deep caves. The spectacular Grotte de la Reine Hortense is the best known. It's located in the northeast of the island, surrounded by lush vegetation. The cave was named after the daughter of the local chief, who in 1853 accepted the proposal of the French Admiral Février des Pointes to bring the island under French rule. This cave is a splendid example of what the ingress of rainwater can do to limestone. Flowers, deciduous trees, and beautiful tree ferns are the main representatives of the exceptional flora in this area. Dicksonia bauduini is an indigenous species and also the most frequent of the 2 tree fern species that grow in New Caledonia. Among the tree ferns on the forest floor live dozens of Caledoniscincus atropunctatus. Caledoniscincus is an indigenous species of skinks. This genus comprises 12 species, of which 11 are indigenous to New Caledonia. Caledoniscincus atropunctatus belongs to the smaller types of this genus, with an overall length of 135 millimeters, 80 millimeters of which is taken up by the tail. There is sexual dimorphism. The males have more black spots on their back. The females have darker flanks. Plascostylus vibratus is an indigenous snail on the Isle of Pines that can attain an overall length of 11 centimeters and weight of up to 100 grams. The snails are a delicacy on the island and considered endangered. Their number is estimated at 3.5 million. The similarity to the human ear is remarkable. One of the larger uninterrupted forests on the island is on the east coast, near Baie d'Oro. There are several records of Correlophus ciliatus in this area. The 2-kilometer deep lagoon of Baie d'Oro is frequently visited by tourists. The Couny Population, the original inhabitants of the Isle of Pines, consists of 8 tribes with their individual chief and 1 single chief for the entire island. Each tribe has its own territory. Vau, the only village on the island, is home to 90% of the total population, divided over 8 districts in line with the 8 tribes. Each tribe contributed to building a palisade of totems along the coast in Vao. These totems, which have also been erected around the St. Joseph monument, offer protection and have virtually become the symbol of the Couny population. Every time a cruise ship moors at the island, it's all hands on deck to please hundreds of visitors, and Melanesian traditional dances are performed by the local tribes. In the culinary field, New Caledonia is known for its bunya. It's a typical Melanesian dish that can be made with chicken, beef, fish, shellfish or crustaceans. One ingredient that is never lacking is taro or manioc. Bunya also contains onions, carrots, beans, sweet potatoes, and other seasonal vegetables. All these ingredients are carefully piled up, wrapped in banana leaves, and buried in an oven pit. In this way, the bunya is braised, as it were. According to most visitors, bunya based on spiny lobster is the best. On festive occasions or important events, Couny people prepare this dish on the basis of fruit bats. For 60 years, from 1864 to 1924, the French used New Caledonia as a penal colony. A large number of these convicts were sentenced for their involvement with the 1871 revolution in Paris. The less serious cases were banished to the Isle of Pines. The first of the more than 3,000 communards, as they were called at the time, arrived on the beach of Couteau in 1872. They also included 12 women. There are almost 200 graves of deceased prisoners on the cemetery of the communards. Many of them did not even survive the 5-month trip from France. A great number died on the Isle of Pines from scurvy and gangrene. For only a few, a memorial stone was erected later by their family. Nevertheless, in the conserved archives, there is still a list of who is buried in which grave. It's surprising that the cemetery was and still is well maintained, while the burial site of the wardens and their families was neglected and can no longer be found. For their water supply, they built this water tower, or chateau d'eau, to provide their lower situated barracks with water. The building was restored in 2005. Missionaries built the small Catholic church in Vao with the aid of the prisoners. Correlophus ciliatus is known to occur in the lower deciduous forests. The largest trees in these forests are Indian fig trees or banyan trees, which offer geckos and other creatures ideal hideouts. The coastal forests near the Grotte de la Troisième on the west coast grow on limestone formations with lots of cracks and holes, an ideal habitat for ground-dwelling lizards and other creatures. The crested gecko lives on the smaller vines and thinner branches between 1 and 4 meters above the forest floor. Correlophus ciliatus was first described in 1866 by Guichenet, but in 1883 Boulanger classified it in the genus Rhacodactylus. For more than a century, the species was no longer spotted, and Bauer and Sadlier labeled it as probably extinct. Correlophus ciliatus was only known from 16 specimens which were found on Grande Terre at the end of the 19th century. The locality reported at the time was incorrectly indicated as Nouméa. Some expeditions in the early 1990s were unsuccessful, since they were all conducted in the Nouméa area. It was Aaron Bauer that suggested that this locality was probably erroneous, but several searches for the species in the wider Nouméa area failed. Rumors of a sighting of the crested gecko on the Isle of Pines after a severe storm on the Isle of Pines triggered the German herpetologist Willy Henkel and his team to search the island in 1994. Several specimens were found, and after almost a century, it was established that the gecko was not extinct. A number of geckos were shipped to Europe for further examination. During an expedition to the Isle of Pines a few months later, Philippe de Vaujoly and his team could confirm Correlophus ciliatus. In 1998, the crested gecko was also found in the southern part of Grande Terre. In 2012, Bauer classified this species again under the genus Correlophus. Because of its distinct build, Correlophus ciliatus is very different from the other Diplodactylinae that occur in New Caledonia. This species is easy to recognize because of the clearly visible crests on both sides of the head that continue in a double dorsal crest across the neck to between the shoulders. These crests consist of small spines that continue above the eyes and are highly reminiscent of eyelashes. This is why it was given the name of eyelash gecko or crested gecko. There is clear sexual dimorphism. The males develop hemipenal thickening and preanal pores. Many crested geckos on the Isle of Pines have a yellowish coloration without a dorsal pattern. This uniform coloring is not site-specific and occurs all over the island. Most of these animals have a maroon-red spot on their flanks. Crested geckos are built to live in the undergrowth. Their bodies, extended toe pads and prehensile tail are proof that these animals are well adapted to this niche in the forest. This undergrowth is less frequented by the heavier and more dominant Rhacodactylus lechianus and Miniarogecko Chihuahua, which claim the higher and more robust branches and tree trunks. In the wild, however, all adult specimens of Correlophus ciliatus are missing their prehensile tails. Geckos drop their tails as a defense mechanism. When molting, the skin is first released from the chest and is removed with both forelegs and hind legs. In healthy animals, the shed skin is eaten immediately. This is a frequent phenomenon in reptiles. It's a healthy habit, since the shed skin contains necessary substances that are to the animal's benefit. In nature, the entire process takes around 50 minutes. Especially in young animals, shedding the skin is a rather delicate process. Trouble in molting, also called disecdysis, may indicate health problems such as dehydration. As the animals grow older, the frequency of molting gradually decreases. However, the gecko will continue to shed its skin throughout its life, since these nocturnal geckos may live to the age of 15 or even 20 years. Miniarogecko Chihuahua occurs in the same habitat. This species prefers mainly thicker trees and their branches, especially Indian fig trees. These animals live higher up in the trees than the crested gecko, on tree trunks and thicker branches at a height of 5 to 8 meters. They seem to occupy the area between Correlophus ciliatus and Rhacodactylus lechianus, the largest gecko to occur on the Isle of Pines. Empty eggshells often indicate the presence of geckos. Rhacodactylus lechianus sometimes descends all the way to the forest floor while foraging for food. It's generally believed that many crested gecko lose their tails while being hunted by the much larger Rhacodactylus lechianus. While almost all geckos will regenerate their tails, the crested gecko lacks this capacity. Rhacodactylus lechianus occurs on Grande Terre as well as all over the Isle of Pines and on many of its satellite islands. It's one of the largest gecko species still extant. These geckos can reach an overall length of almost 40 centimeters, clearly exceeding the length and certainly the weight of another gecko giant, Uroplatis giganteus from Madagascar. The animals on Grande Terre can weigh up to 400 grams, while the specimens on the Isle of Pines remain considerably lighter, up to a maximum of 290 grams, and remain smaller. Because of the size difference, German herpetologists Seip and Obst described the animals of the Isle of Pines as the subspecies Rhacodactylus lechianus henkeli. Most of the geckos deposit their eggs in tree cavities and crevices in pairs. Only the crested gecko is known to lay its eggs sometimes on the forest floor between decaying leaves. Recently deposited eggs of Correlophus ciliatus weigh from 2.1 grams to 2.25 grams and measure 21 to 23 millimeters in length and 11 to 12 millimeters in width. Leoscincus nigrofasciolatum is a large tree-dwelling skink which can attain an overall length of 35 centimeters, two-thirds of which are taken up by the tail. It is indigenous and occurs all over New Caledonia, on Grande Terre as well as on the satellite islands. Its major enemies are cats and particularly rats. However, for some time now this skink is also threatened by fire ants, Wasmannia auropunctata, originating from South America. These ants only measure 1.5 millimeters and are locally called fourmis électriques, or electric ants. Nactus pelagicus is the only representative of the genus Nactus that occurs in New Caledonia. It is also the only gecko living on the forest floor, which is mainly found in the lower deciduous forests along the coast between the roots and at the bottom of deciduous tree trunks. This gecko can attain an overall length of 12 centimeters. It eats insects and is active at night. In the daytime it hides under tree roots and in the many crevices in the coral soil. Nactus pelagicus is widespread and lives on the islands in the Pacific Ocean, in the east to French Polynesia, and in the west along the coasts of Queensland and Australia. Its reproduction is asexual or monogenetic, that is, the females lay eggs without them having to be fertilized by males. On some islands in the Pacific Ocean, such as Vanuatu, there are populations that reproduce asexually and sexually. On the Isle of Pines, this phenomenon has not been studied yet. The toes end in small claws, and its English name, slender-toed gecko, is due to the long, thin, and bent toes. Bavaia robusta is a gecko that occurs on Grande Terre as well as on the Isle of Pines. The genus Bavaia is indigenous to New Caledonia and comprises 11 species, 3 of which can be found on the Isle of Pines. Bavaia robusta can reach an overall length of 160 millimeters, half of which is taken up by the tail. On the Isle of Pines, it lives mainly in the lower situated deciduous forests along coastal areas in the undergrowth. In the daytime, it hides in crevices and hollows and under loose tree bark. It avoids the crests of trees, since there it may be prey for Rhacodactylus lechianus, and the younger animals for Miniarogekko Chihuahua. It only occurs in deciduous forests, and occurs sympatric with Correlophus ciliatus, Rhacodactylus lechianus, and Miniarogekko Chihuahua. Bavaia sauvagei was recently described by Bauer and Sadlier as a distinct species. This gecko can reach a maximum length of 130 millimeters, of which the tail takes up 70 millimeters. It lives in the same deciduous forests as Bavaia robusta. On Grande Terre, the small fire ant is an essential hazard to the survival of many species of reptiles, and particularly for the Bavaia family. Bavaia ciclura is another member of the genus that occurs on the Isle of Pines. It is very similar to Bovia sauvagei, and they are difficult to distinguish from each other. This gecko was described by Gunther as early as 1872 and occurs all over New Caledonia, also on the satellite islands. Laticauda saint-géronci is an endemic sea crate to New Caledonia. In the breeding season, these snakes exit the water to lay their eggs on land. This snake is highly venomous, but not aggressive. They prey mainly on conger eels and moray eels, which they can easily reach in crevices in the coral because of their slim build. They come to shore to digest their food, to escape from their enemies, mainly sharks. After this interesting and informative expedition, we have to face a 40-hour return trip.